city of Stonehill was a place of contrasts. Luxurious skyscrapers piercing the sky while dark alleyways told silent stories of forgotten souls. Among these shadows lived a girl named Elena Moore, whose life had been nothing but a cruel test of endurance. Once the bright-eyed daughter of loving parents, her world crumbled in a single night when a drunk driver took their lives, leaving her alone and penniless at 16. The state placed her in foster care, but the system failed her. Abuse, neglect, and escape marked the years that followed until she found herself on the streets at 22. She sold candy on subway trains and recited poetry for spare change, carrying only a small backpack and a worn-out photograph of her family. People walked by her like she was invisible. Still, she refused to beg. She believed her dignity was the last treasure she had, and no hardship would steal that from her. On a cold Friday evening in November, Elena stood beneath the iron arches of Brookvale Bridge, a place known to the city's elite as the underworld of Stonehill. She was humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing when headlights suddenly swerved, followed by the sickening crunch of metal against concrete. A black luxury car had slammed into a street lamp, smoke rising from the hood. Without hesitation, she dashed toward the wreckage, her breath turning to fog in the frozen air. Through the shattered windshield, she saw a man unconscious, his face bloodied, airbag deployed. Her hands shook, but fear didn't stop her. She forced the driver's side door open and screamed for help, but no one came. So she did what no one expected: pulled the man out, dragging him with all her strength just seconds before the engine burst into flames. The explosion lit the night like a thunderclap. Elena collapsed beside the man, coughing, her arms burned but alive. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics almost ignored her, mistaking her for a bystander or a thief. But a police officer reviewed the dashcam footage and realized she had saved the life of Christopher Hayes, one of the most powerful real estate moguls in the country. Known for his icy demeanor, his presence graced every front page and business magazine. Elena had no idea who he was. She only knew that he was a man, unconscious and dying, and she couldn't watch him die. That night, her world shifted. At the hospital, they kept her in the waiting room for hours. She didn't ask for money, fame, or even thanks. Just wanted to know if the man was okay. A nurse finally emerged and told her he'd live, with cracked ribs, a concussion, and minor burns. Elena smiled softly and left. She never expected to see him again. But fate had its own plans. A week later, in a private hospital room overlooking the city skyline, Christopher stared at a photo the police had printed from the dashcam, a blurry image of a woman in rags, soot on her face, hair matted with ash. He'd been conscious only for seconds after the crash, but he remembered her voice, calm and determined. "You're not dying today," she had said. Those words kept echoing. He asked his assistant to find her, but there was no address, no record, only her name from the police report. Elena Moore, a ghost in the system. And for the first time in years, Christopher felt something beyond spreadsheets and stock portfolios. He felt grateful, curious, haunted by a stranger's courage. Days turned into a restless search. His assistant, Marla, found a street musician near Brookvale Bridge who remembered Elena. "Sweet girl, talks like a poet, sells candy, sings old songs," he'd said. With that, Christopher decided to go in person. Against medical advice, with bruises still fresh. He put on a hoodie and jeans and wandered into the forgotten corners of his city. When he finally found her near an old fountain at Whitestone Plaza, she was reading a book to a child, another street kid, with a calm serenity that made the chaos around them disappear. He watched for a long while before stepping forward. "Elena," he said, unsure what came next. She turned, startled, her eyes locking onto his. Recognition bloomed slowly, but she didn't smile. "You made it," she said quietly, her voice like falling leaves. Christopher offered her coffee, shelter, money, anything. But Elena shook her head. "I'm not here to be rescued. I've had enough cages with golden locks." Her words pierced deeper than she knew. Still, she agreed to walk with him just for a while. That walk turned into a 2-hour conversation on a city bench under a streetlight, where Christopher listened more than he spoke. For once, someone wasn't trying to impress him. Elena didn't care who he was. She spoke of the books she loved, the dreams she once had, and how she survived winters by reading in libraries and thinking of her mother's voice. "People see the dirt and think it defines me," she said. "But I'm still me. I just got lost for a while." Christopher didn't see a homeless girl anymore. He saw a woman with fire in her soul. That night, something changed in both of them, but neither of them said it out loud. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful love stories. Hit the like button to help us reach more hearts. And tell us in the comments, what kind of story would you love to see next? The days that followed were filled with a strange tension neither of them fully understood. Christopher, back in his glass-walled office overlooking Stonehill's skyline, found himself constantly distracted. Meetings blurred together, reports became irrelevant, and conversations felt hollow. His mind kept drifting to that night, to Elena's voice and the clarity in her eyes. There was something disarming about her. She wasn't impressed by his empire or his suits or his wealth. She treated him like a man, not a brand. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an image crafted for public consumption, but a human being rediscovering vulnerability. And that was terrifying. He asked Marla to schedule a meeting with his foundation team. "I want to start a housing initiative," he said abruptly. 4 street populations. She blinked in confusion but nodded. Something in him had shifted. Elena, meanwhile, continued her daily ritual, walking miles across the city, finding safe corners to sell her candy, reading borrowed books in public parks, and avoiding attention. But something lingered from that night. Not just the burns on her arms, which were healing slowly, but the memory of Christopher's face. First broken and afraid, then soft and searching. She'd seen enough men in her life to know the dangerous types. And yet, with him, she didn't feel hunted. She felt seen. That unsettled her. Feelings were luxuries she couldn't afford. Every time her heart fluttered when remembering their talk by the bench, she scolded herself. "You're not in his world." Still, she found herself walking by his building once or twice, as if the echo of that moment could anchor her in something real. Something she hadn't felt since her parents died. Connection. One afternoon, a black SUV pulled beside her near the library. She tensed, ready to run, but the window rolled down, and Marla smiled warmly. Christopher asked if you'd join him for lunch. No strings. Just a meal. Elena hesitated. Pride and caution warred in her chest, but hunger and curiosity won. She got in. The restaurant was a rooftop bistro with a view that stole her breath. She felt out of place, her thrifted coat contrasting with the polished decor. But Christopher rose when she arrived, pulled out her chair and said, "Thank you for coming." The table was set, but he wasn't wearing a suit. Just a sweater and jeans. Human. He didn't mention the accident or charity. Instead, they talked about books, music, how city lights look like constellations when you're far enough away. It wasn't a date. It was something gentler. The start of trust. But the world doesn't let miracles bloom without resistance. That same evening, tabloids exploded with headlines. Billionaire seen with street girl. Secret romance or PR stunt. Photos of Elena leaving the SUV were everywhere. Online comments were brutal. Gold digger. Drug addict. Where did he find her? Under a bridge. Christopher was furious. He called his PR team demanding a takedown. "I didn't leak this," Marla swore. Elena saw the news at a cafe window and froze. Her body went cold. Not from shame but from recognition. She knew this cycle. Society lifted people up just to mock their fall. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to be a project or a story. She disappeared, changed parks, changed her route, avoided places he might find her. And when Christopher called her phone, a simple flip device he had bought her, she let it ring. For days he searched. His driver, his team, even Marla combed shelters and libraries. But Elena was smoke. Meanwhile, Christopher gave his first public statement. "She saved my life." That should be the only headline. But the media twisted it. Some praised his nobility. Others mocked his naivete. He felt trapped in a world he'd built, one that made it impossible to be real. Finally, he returned to where it all started, Brookvale Bridge. And there, beneath the rusted arch, he waited. Not with bodyguards or cameras, just him, a bench and a cup of coffee. "I'll be here every day at 5, he whispered, more to the wind than to anyone listening. The first day she didn't come, nor the second. But on the 4th, just as the sun was bleeding gold into the sky, she appeared. Silent, guarded, but there. She sat beside him without a word. For minutes they just listened to the city. Then she said, "I don't want your world, Christopher." He nodded. "I don't want you to change for it. I want the world to make room for someone like you." That made her look at him, really look. "You're still healing," she murmured, noticing the tightness in his movements. "So are you," he replied. And in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but the blueprint of it. The seed. The possibility. A fragile bridge between their lives, suspended over trauma and trust. They didn't touch, didn't promise anything, but they didn't walk away either. That night, as streetlights flickered on, their silhouettes remained side by side. Proof that sometimes the most powerful beginnings start with the decision to simply stay. Elena had always carried silence like armor. She had learned early that words could betray, that vulnerability was a luxury for people who had homes, families, warm kitchens, and locked doors. So, when she sat beside Christopher under the bridge again the next day, she said little. But her presence said enough. Over the following weeks, a strange rhythm formed. They met at the same bench, shared coffee and silence, sometimes stories, sometimes just breath. Christopher never pushed. He told her about his childhood in Connecticut, raised by a single father who built a company from a garage and died of a heart attack before seeing it reach the Fortune 500. He worked himself into the ground, he said, and I promised I wouldn't do the same. But he had. The money, the boardrooms, the politics. It had consumed him until the crash forced him to see again. And Elena, somehow, was part of that awakening. One night, as rain misted the city and the bridge glistened in puddles, she finally broke the dam. I was 16 when I lost them, she whispered. Christopher didn't speak. He let her voice find its way. My mother died first, cancer. My father couldn't handle it. He started drinking. Then one night he drove off the road. I was at a school recital. I remember coming home to silence. No note. Just silence. She wiped her face, not caring if he saw. I moved in with an aunt. She used me more than she raised me. When I left at 19, I promised myself I'd never go back to depending on anyone. Christopher reached for her hand but stopped himself. You've been surviving ever since, he said softly. She nodded. Every day. There was no melodrama in her tone, just exhaustion wrapped in pride. And in that moment, Christopher understood. Her strength wasn't in enduring pain, but in refusing to let it define her. But the past has a way of catching up, and not always through memory. A man showed up at the bench one evening, tall, thin, eyes like rusted knives. Elena, he said, and her face drained. It's been a long time. Christopher stood up instantly, alert. Who are you? He asked. Family, the man said, grinning. Or what's left of it. His name was Jared, Elena's cousin. She hadn't seen him in 6 years, and the last time she had, he'd stolen the last money she had hidden in a sock drawer. What do you want? She asked. Just catching up, he said, but his eyes flicked toward Christopher's shoes, his watch. Christopher stepped in. If you come near her again, I'll have you arrested. Jared laughed. Oh, pretty boys playing night now. How cute. He walked off, but his presence stayed like smoke, lingering, staining, threatening to return. That night, Elena didn't meet Christopher. He waited, then returned to his penthouse feeling a strange ache in his chest. Not fear, helplessness. He had resources, security, money, but none of those could erase the ghosts of her past. And for the first time he wondered, was loving her going to hurt her more than heal her? Meanwhile, Elena slept behind a church 2 blocks from the bridge. Eyes open, fists clenched, mind spiraling. Jared knew where she was, who she was with. And that made her dangerous. To herself, to Christopher. They always come back, she whispered to the night. Right when I start to believe again. But even in the dark, part of her wanted to run back to him. To believe he wouldn't run when things got ugly. And for the first time in years she prayed. Not for food or shelter. Just for one thing, courage. 2 days later, she returned to the bench. Christopher was there just like he promised. She sat down, didn't speak. He handed her a coffee. He won't hurt you again, he said. I promise. She looked at him with something raw in her expression. "Don't promise things you can't control." He nodded. "Then let's promise each other this. We don't run. Even when it gets ugly." She studied him as if waiting for the lie, but found none. And so, she said something simple. "Okay." It wasn't a vow, but it was a beginning. The next week, he invited her to a gala. "Come as you are," he said. "You don't need a dress or makeup. I want them to see the woman who saved my life." Elena laughed. "You're insane." "Possibly," he grinned. "But I'd rather be insane beside you than sane in an empty penthouse." The gala was chaos. Lights, cameras, glittering gowns. And Elena, in her second-hand coat, walking beside a billionaire. Some gasped. Some whispered. But Christopher didn't flinch. "This is Elena," he said at every introduction. "She's the bravest woman I know." And while the vultures circled, one person approached her gently. An older woman in a navy dress. "Are you the girl from the fire?" Elena nodded. The woman smiled. "Thank you. My son was in that car too. You saved both." She pressed something into Elena's hand. An old locket. "It belonged to my mother. She would have wanted you to have it." Elena stood frozen. For the first time in years, a stranger's touch didn't feel invasive. Felt like grace. That night, back at the bridge, she cried. Not from pain, but from something she barely remembered how to name. Hope. The night after the gala, as the city exhaled its noise into the quiet hours, Christopher stood alone in his penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a man far different from the public's illusion. A man whose power could no longer shield him from himself. Elena had gone home. Her home being a church basement she refused to leave until she felt worthy of more. He respected that. But her absence left him confronting something he had buried so deep. It ached now to acknowledge it. He opened the safe in his study and took out a letter. Creased, yellowed, almost illegible. It was the last note his mother ever wrote. Suicide note. He had never told anyone. Not his father. Not even Marla. All these years, he'd lived with the guilt of not hearing her cries, of being too distracted by a college party that night to answer the 6 missed calls. It shaped him, hardened him, taught him control was safety, and silence was strength. Until Elena. The next evening they sat on the bridge again. For a while neither spoke. The city lights blinked below like distant signals from another life. Then Christopher turned to her, voice hollow but steady. "There's something I never told anyone. Not even my father." Elena tilted her head, alert. "When I was 19, my mother killed herself." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. He continued. "I ignored her calls. I thought she was just being dramatic. I was partying, drinking, laughing. By the time I got home, it was too late." His hands trembled slightly. She'd left a note saying she didn't want to be a burden anymore. That she hoped I'd live a better life without her. He blinked fast, trying to steady himself. "I've built everything I have trying to prove her wrong. Trying to silence that guilt. But it never worked. Not until you pulled me from that fire. That was the first time I felt forgiven. Even if you didn't mean to." Elena's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She reached out and placed her hand gently over his. Pain makes liars out of us, she whispered. It tells us we're alone. It tells us it's our fault. But pain lies. That's what I've learned. He looked at her, the woman who had nothing yet gave everything. Why are you still here? He asked, genuinely baffled. Because you're finally showing me who you are, she said. And I like that man better than the billionaire in the magazines. For the first time, Christopher let himself lean on someone. Not in pride, not in charm, but in grief. Elena didn't move. She let him be small. And in that stillness, the air between them changed. It wasn't romantic. It was sacred. Two broken souls quietly acknowledging that healing doesn't come in noise, but in presence. In the following days, Christopher vanished from headlines. He stopped attending board meetings. Let Marla handle the empire. The world speculated. Illness, breakdown, scandal. None were true. He was just living differently. He spent mornings at soup kitchens, afternoons walking beside Elena as she handed out food to the homeless community she still called her people. He refused interviews, donated anonymously, and every night he returned to the bridge. That was their temple now. One night, Elena brought him a gift, a sketchbook filled with portraits of the city, its shadows, its warmth, its broken corners. He turned each page with reverence. You drew these? She nodded. That's what I did before life got in the way. I used to dream of being an artist. He looked at the lines, the angles, the soul in each stroke. You already are one, but fate always tests peace. That weekend, during one of their shared walks, Christopher's phone buzzed. Urgent call from Marla. You need to come in. There's a board revolt brewing. They think you've lost focus. They're moving to remove you as CEO. He glanced at Elena, then back at the screen. Tell them I'll be there Monday. When Monday came, he entered the boardroom with a quiet that unsettled them all. They expected arrogance, power plays. Instead, he spoke calmly. I'm stepping down. Protest. You can't. I already did, he interrupted. I built this company to honor my parents, but I won't sacrifice my soul to keep it. He handed over a sealed folder. My replacement. She's smarter than I ever was. Fickle. Visionary. Marla opened it. Her name was there. The room fell silent. For the first time, Christopher chose humanity over legacy. That evening, Elena met him with furrowed brows. Are you okay? He nodded. I've never been better. You walked away from everything. No, he said. I walked toward something. And then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small red velvet box. Elena's breath hitched. Don't, she whispered. Not out of gratitude. He opened it slowly. A ring. Simple, elegant, silver with a single sapphire. Not gratitude, he said. Respect. Oh, home. She closed the box gently. I'm not ready. He nodded, no offense taken. Then I'll wait. Not for your yes, but for your peace. She smiled, tears threatening. That might take time. I have time, he said, taking her hand as they walked back to the bridge. Two souls in process, two hearts not yet ready to leap, but learning how to stand together. The quiet that followed the rejected proposal wasn't awkward. It was respectful. Christopher had given her space, not distance, and Elena used it to breathe. But peace, as she had learned, never lingers long when your scars are still open. 1 week later, she was crossing 9th Street near an old cafe when she felt it. Eyes on her. She turned, heart skipping. Jared. Again. Leaning against a lamppost, cigarette in mouth, a smirk in place. "You've come up in the world," he said, his voice oily. "Trading corners for penthouses now?" She didn't flinch. "Leave, Jared. I'm not that girl anymore." "Maybe," he said, stepping closer. "But I am still that man. And you owe me." Her fists clenched. "I owe you nothing." But he wasn't here for words. He shoved her against the wall and whispered, "You have value now. Influence. And I have people who need a favor." That's when Christopher arrived. He hadn't meant to follow her. He was dropping off a donation at the shelter when he saw her across the street. When Jared pushed her, something ancient awoke inside him. Rage. Not the performative anger of boardrooms, but primal, protective fury. He crossed the street in seconds, grabbed Jared by the collar, and slammed him against the brick. "Touch her again and I swear." "Whoa, billionaires got claws," Jared sneered. "Careful, golden boy. You have more to lose than I do." Police sirens cut through the moment. A bystander had called them. Elena stepped in, pulled Christopher back. "Let him go," she whispered. "He's not worth it." Jared vanished into the alley like the rat he was. But the scene was already caught on 3 phones. And by morning, Christopher's name was trending again. Not as a philanthropist or executive, but as a man caught in a violent altercation with a homeless woman's relative. The tabloids feasted. Headlines twisted the story. Billionaires fall. From boardroom to street brawls. The woman behind Christopher Dorn's breakdown. Elena was painted as a manipulator, a former addict, a schemer. None of it was true, but truth doesn't trend. Within 48 hours, brands withdrew sponsorships. Old colleagues distanced themselves. Even Marla, though loyal, warned, "We need to control this narrative." Christopher refused. "Let them talk," he said. "I'm not hiding her." Elena, however, was shattered. "This is what I feared," she whispered, packing up her few belongings from the church shelter. "That loving me would cost you everything." He reached for her hand. "It's not a cost. It's a choice. And I made it a long time ago." But she pulled away. "I need to disappear for a while. For your sake. For mine." And just like that she was gone. Christopher searched for her for days. Called shelters. Visited train stations. Nothing. It was as if she'd vanished into the same shadows from where she came. He returned every evening to the bench under the bridge, waiting, hoping. But the nights stretched empty. Meanwhile, Elena found herself in a small coastal town 3 hours away, painting again, using the sketchbook Christopher had once held like it was sacred. She found work cleaning in an art gallery, where a kind woman named Clara gave her canvases and a place to sleep. "You've got something rare," Clara said, watching her paint. "People don't bleed onto paper the way you do." But Elena remained silent. Her heart was still tethered to the city, to the man who had seen her soul and loved her anyway. Yet she believed it was over. that she'd done the right thing by leaving. She didn't know he hadn't stopped looking. Then, one rainy afternoon, Clara rushed in with a newspaper. "Is this you?" On the cover, Elena's face, a painting behind her, a photo taken through the gallery's window. The article headline: "Mysterious artist from the streets moves hearts in seaside town." A visiting journalist had written a piece after buying one of her canvases anonymously. Lena froze. "How? I didn't even know he was a reporter," Clara said, beaming. "Your story's gone viral." She dropped the paper on the table. In the corner, almost hidden, was a quote from the journalist. When I asked her what she wanted most in life, she said, "To see the man who believed in me, under the bridge where I found my soul." Christopher saw that quote 2 hours later. And without hesitation, he drove through the storm, headed for the town he didn't know existed until now. When he arrived, soaked to the bone, Elena was already waiting outside the gallery, clutching the paper, tears in her eyes. They didn't speak right away. Words were too small for the ache between them. Finally he stepped forward. "You disappeared. I thought I was protecting you." "You weren't," he said, voice breaking. "You were abandoning me." Silence. Then she said, "I'm scared, Christopher. I don't know how to be loved without ruining it." He took her hand slowly. "Then let's learn together. No more running. From press, from pain, from each other." She looked up, and for the first time in weeks, smiled. "Okay. But this time, I get to choose the bridge." "Deal," he said, holding her as the rain blurred the world into something new, something clean. The storm passed, but something stronger remained. Their decision to stay. Back in the city, the world hadn't forgotten them. In fact, it had begun to hunger for the truth. The viral article about "the girl from the streets who paints with blood-colored memories" sparked curiosity. And when Clara's gallery held Elena's first exhibit, it was packed, not just with locals, but with art critics, collectors, influencers. One of them whispered, "She's the next Banksy, but honest." Elena stood in the corner, stunned, watching strangers cry in front of the canvas where she had painted the exact moment Christopher had proposed. With the ring, the trembling hands, and her own face, not yet ready. Christopher stood beside her, proudly silent. A man who once used money as armor now used her light as his shield. That night, her paintings sold out. But one she refused to sell, the one of the bridge. That one was sacred. Offers came in. Talk shows. Galleries in Europe. Even a film studio wanted rights to her life story. But Elena said no. "My story isn't over," she told Clara. "And I don't want anyone else to write the ending." Christopher, meanwhile, made his own quiet moves. He stepped down as CEO of his company, naming Marla as interim head. "You were always better at leading with heart," he said. Then he sold 2 of his luxury properties and funneled the funds into a new project, the Bridge Foundation, a space for homeless youth to access shelter, art, education, and dignity. When the media asked why, he simply replied, "Because I once found the love of my life under a bridge. And that's where I learned what real value is." The public softened. The tabloids reversed. Christopher Dorn, the redeemed tycoon. They weren't just a couple now, they were a symbol. But with visibility came risk. Jared returned, this time not alone. He threatened to sue, claiming that Elena's fame was built on a shared past of exploitation. He demanded royalties, attention, validation. And when she refused, he threatened to leak falsified records, photoshopped images, old street footage with damning audio. Elena froze. She was stronger now, yes, but not invincible. Christopher, seeing her tremble, did something no one expected. He invited Jared to a press event. On live broadcast, Christopher handed Jared a thick file. These are affidavits. From the shelter staff. From social workers. From the woman you hurt. This file proves you're lying. Then he turned to the cameras. And if the press believes him instead of her, that tells us more about our society than it does about us. The crowd was silent. Jared left in humiliation. Elena, speechless, just stared at the man beside her. That night, they sat on the rooftop of the gallery, wine in hand, wrapped in a blanket. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "He'll come back again. Then we'll face him again," Christopher said. "Every time. Together." She leaned into him. "You gave up your empire for me." He smiled. "No, I gave up everything that wasn't real. For the one thing that is." She took his hand, fingers tracing the lines of his palm. "You once said love is a risk. I'm ready now. No hesitation. No walls." He looked at her, eyes gleaming. "Then let's build something no one can tear down." Below them the city glittered. Above them, stars blinked like promises waiting to be kept. And between them, silence, deep, secure, and warm like a vow unspoken. The next morning, Christopher woke before dawn and left quietly, not to flee, but to finish something he had started long ago. He returned to the bridge, alone, in hand a small notebook, his journal. He sat where Elena once saved him, the exact spot where he'd nearly died and truly started living. He began to write. "I was broken before I found her. Not in money, not in title, but in soul. And she stitched me together without asking for anything. This bridge is not a monument of our pain. It's the altar of our rebirth." He closed the journal and placed it inside a weatherproof box, locking it under the bench with a note. "To whoever sits here next, don't give up. Miracles sleep under shadows." Then he returned to Elena, holding one last box in his hand. Velvet. But inside, not what you think. Elena opened it slowly. "What is this?" she asked. Christopher smiled. "Our new home. It's small, near the sea. No gates, no guards. Just art, firewood, and 2 mugs for mornings." She laughed. "You make it sound like paradise." "It's not paradise," he said. "It's peace." She threw her arms around him, and for the first time, their kiss wasn't desperate or uncertain. It was whole, final yet beginning. And as they packed to leave the city that had once buried them both, the world watched. Not with pity, not with scandal, but with reverence. Because in them, people saw what they longed for themselves. That no matter how lost you are, someone, somewhere, might still find you worth saving.